The tragic story of Rick Rude is as heartbreaking as it gets. His death shocked the entire wrestling world, and later it was revealed that a dangerous mix of medications played a major role in it. But what really happened? How did one of wrestling's most confident and powerful stars end up in such a dark place? Let's dive in and uncover the truth behind Rick Rude's final days. His story starts in Robbinsdale, Minnesota, a place that, surprisingly, became something of a factory for future wrestling legends. For some reason, this small town kept producing tough, athletic kids who would go on to shape the world of professional wrestling. One of those kids was Richard Rude, better known to fans as Ravishing Rick Rude. But before he became the arrogant, muscle-bound heartthrob that wrestling audiences love to hate, he was just another hard-working guy from the neighborhood. Strong, determined, and tough as nails. Growing up, Rude was surrounded by others who shared his passion for physical competition. One of his closest friends from childhood was Kurt Hennig, the man fans would later know as Mr. Perfect. The two were inseparable, constantly pushing each other to get stronger, faster, and better. Their friendship lasted their entire lives, and people who knew them said they were more like brothers than friends. Before Rude ever stepped into a wrestling ring, he was already known for being legitimately tough. He didn't just look strong, he actually was. He competed in tough man competitions, those brutal contests that tested raw strength and endurance. He also worked as a bouncer in some of Minneapolis's roughest bars. These weren't the kind of places where you politely asked someone to leave. They were the kind where you had to fight to stay in control. There are stories from that time that paint a clear picture of just how powerful he was. Some say Rude could knock a man out cold with a single open-handed slap. And the thing is, no one really doubts it. He wasn't just a bodybuilder posing for attention. He was a guy who could back up every ounce of muscle he had. That kind of real-world toughness made him stand out. And it was a big reason why so many people believed he was destined for wrestling. Rude eventually found his way into the wrestling business thanks to a man named Eddie Sharkey, a legendary trainer who had a sharp eye for talent. Sharkey was responsible for training several big names in wrestling, including the Road Warriors, who became one of the most dominant tag teams in history. When Sharkey saw Rude, he recognized potential instantly. With his natural athleticism, solid build, and fearless attitude, Rude seemed born for the ring. Under Sharkey's guidance, Rude learned the fundamentals of professional wrestling. He was a quick learner, taking to the business with the same focus and drive that had made him successful in everything else. By 1982, he officially began his wrestling career. It didn't take long for people to notice him. He had the look, the confidence, and the kind of intensity that made you believe he could hurt you if he wanted to. But what truly made Rick Rude stand out was what came next: the creation of the ravishing Rick Rude character. The transformation began when a promoter in the Memphis territory saw him and realized he had something special. Rude's chiseled physique, sharp facial features, and natural arrogance were too perfect to waste on just another tough guy role. This promoter encouraged him to lean into his looks and attitude, to become someone fans could love to hate. And just like that, Ravishing Rick Rude was born. The persona fit him like a glove. In the ring, he was cocky, charming, and unbelievably confident. He would strut to the ring, slowly remove his robe, and show off his sculpted body while the crowd booed and screamed at him. But instead of being bothered, Rude loved it. He'd grab the microphone and insult the audience in ways that made them even angrier. One of his favorite lines was calling fans inner-city sweat hogs, mocking them for not being on his level. After delivering his insults, he would perform his signature pose, a slow, seductive hip swivel that made women cheer and men fume. It was pure arrogance, but it worked beautifully. Rick Rude knew exactly how to get under people's skin, and that was what made him one of the most hated heels in wrestling. Yet even when fans booed him, deep down, they couldn't help but admire how good he was at his job. He was magnetic, the kind of villain you couldn't look away from. His popularity grew quickly. Soon, Rude was on the biggest stage of them all, the World Wrestling Federation. There, his ravishing character reached its full potential. He carried the same smug attitude and insulting swagger, and it led him into some major rivalries. One of the biggest was with the Ultimate Warrior, a feud that would go down as one of the highlights of his career. The two were polar opposites. The warrior was wild, explosive, and larger than life, while Rude was calm, methodical, and manipulative. Their clashes were electric, and at WrestleMania 5, Rick Rude pulled off the unthinkable. He defeated the Ultimate Warrior to win the Intercontinental Championship. It was a massive moment that solidified his place as one of wrestling's top villains. But here's the part that most fans never saw. Behind the ravishing persona, Richard Rude was a completely different man. In real life, he was quiet, respectful, and deeply devoted to his family. Despite playing a womanizer on TV, he was actually a loving husband. Many of his peers later said that the contrast between his character and his real personality couldn't have been greater. According to friends like Bret Hart, Rude was also a man of faith, someone who lived by strong personal values. He was loyal to those he cared about and would stand by them no matter what. That loyalty became especially clear in 1997 during one of the most infamous moments in wrestling history, the Montreal Screwjob. When Bret Hart was betrayed by Vince McMahon in that shocking double cross at Survivor Series, Rude was one of the few people who didn't just sit back and watch. He was furious at what happened to his friend. When Vince McMahon later entered the locker room to confront Hart, Rude refused to leave. He stood by Bret's side, making sure he wasn't cornered or forced into any kind of compromising position. He wasn't loud or aggressive about it. He was just quietly protective, showing the kind of loyalty that very few people in that business ever had. To him, friendship meant something. And even though wrestling was full of politics and betrayals, Rude stayed true to his values. In fact, right after the incident, Rude called Eric Bischoff, the head of WCW, where Bret was headed next, to make sure the story got out accurately. He wanted Bischoff to know the truth, to confirm that the screw job wasn't a work or some publicity stunt. By doing that, Rude helped protect Bret Hart's reputation and ensured that fans would understand what really happened that night. It was just another example of the kind of man Rick Rude really was. Someone who cared deeply about the people close to him and didn't hesitate to stand up for what he believed was right. By the early 1990s, Rick Rude had built himself into one of the most recognizable names in professional wrestling. He had the looks, the physique, and the confidence of a man who seemed unstoppable. But behind that strong exterior, the physical toll of years inside the ring was slowly catching up to him. And in 1994, everything changed in a way no one could have imagined. It all happened during what was supposed to be just another big match, one that took place halfway across the world in Japan. Rude was facing off against Sting, a man he had wrestled countless times before. Both were experienced, both trusted each other, and both were known for putting on exciting matches. But on that particular night, one moment would change the course of Rick Rude's life forever. The match started like any other, intense, physical, and filled with high energy. The Japanese crowd was electric, cheering for every move. Then came the moment that would end it all. Rude went for a move outside the ring, diving towards Sting, but something went terribly wrong. As he came down, his lower back slammed against the sharp edge of a raised entrance ramp. It wasn't a typical landing. It wasn't even a bad fall. It was catastrophic. The impact was devastating. He had suffered a severe spinal injury right then and there. For most people, that would have been the end of the match immediately. But Rude wasn't like most people. Despite the pain, despite knowing something was horribly wrong, he refused to quit. He somehow finished the match, a decision that showed just how unbelievably tough he was. Those who were there that night still talk about it. They couldn't believe that a man with a serious spinal injury managed to continue wrestling for several more minutes. It was pure heart, pure pride, and pure toughness. But it also came at a cost. That single moment ended Rick Rude's in-ring career forever. The injury damaged his neck and back so badly that doctors told him wrestling again wasn't an option. At just 35 years old, still in his prime, Rick Rude was forced to retire. It was a devastating blow for a man whose entire life revolved around the ring. Wrestling wasn't just his job, it was his identity. Rude tried to stay involved in the business in other ways, appearing as a manager and occasionally as a TV personality. But it wasn't the same. The roar of the crowd, the adrenaline, the feeling of being ravishing Rick Rude, it was all gone. And what replaced it was pain. Real, constant, unbearable pain. The spinal injury he suffered in Japan never fully healed. It left him with chronic pain that made daily life a struggle. And for someone who had always been in peak physical condition, that was hard to accept. Imagine going from being one of the most physically impressive men in wrestling, a man who prided himself on his strength and control, to suddenly struggling with simple things like walking or sleeping comfortably. That kind of change can break a person from the inside. As time went on, Rude's condition didn't improve. He began relying on medication to help him deal with the constant pain. It started as something to help him get through the day, a way to function, to be there for his family, and to maintain some sense of normalcy. But slowly that reliance turned into something deeper. The painkillers became a part of his life, and his body began to depend on them. Friends later said that Rude's drive and determination sometimes worked against him. He didn't like to appear weak, and he didn't like asking for help. So instead of slowing down, he tried to push through the pain, even when his body was screaming for rest. The more he trained, the more his injuries flared up, and the more medication he needed to keep going. By the late 1990s, Rude's life had become a constant battle between his physical limitations and his willpower. But there was something else, a dream that kept him motivated. Despite everything he had been through, he wanted to make a comeback. He truly believed that one day he could step back into the ring. To prepare for that comeback, Rude started training harder than ever before. He was determined to rebuild his body and prove that he could still perform at the same level. But as inspiring as that sounds, it was also incredibly dangerous. His back injury had never fully healed, and his pain tolerance was already being pushed to the edge. To cope, he reportedly used more medication, including painkillers, muscle relaxants, and sleep aids. Then in April 1999, tragedy struck. On April 20th, at his home in Alpharetta, Georgia, Rick Rude was found unconscious by his wife. It was a moment that shattered his family and friends. Despite efforts to save him, it was too late. Richard Rude, the man behind the Ravishing persona, was pronounced dead at just 40 years old. At first, the official cause of death was listed as heart failure. But when the autopsy results came out, they told a more complicated story. The report revealed that Rude had died from an accidental overdose of mixed medications. Empty prescription pill bottles were found near him, and it became clear that his struggle with chronic pain and medication had spiraled into something tragic. Among the substances linked to his death were Valium and gamma-hydroxybutyrate, or GHB. At the time, GHB was rumored to be something Rude used for recovery, and as a sleep aid, it was even believed to help with muscle repair after workouts. But combining such substances, especially with prescription painkillers, can be deadly. Those close to him said he had been pushing himself harder than ever in the months leading up to his death. He truly wanted that comeback. He wanted one more moment in the spotlight, one more chance to show the world that ravishing Rick Rude still had it. But the effort to train through unbearable pain and the reliance on medication to make it possible ultimately became too much for his body to handle. It's heartbreaking when you think about it. Rick Rude wasn't destroyed by scandal or by fame or by the kind of personal chaos that derails so many celebrities. He was destroyed by pain, by a body that betrayed him after years of giving everything to his profession. His toughness, which had carried him through so many battles in and out of the ring, became the very thing that worked against him in the end. And that wraps up today's video. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.